The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Earlier this week, I told you about Pastor Wellington Boone. We had a clip of him on a completely unhinged, delusional anti-gay rant at the Family Research Council's Watchmen on the Wall conference. There's one other clip from that conference that I want to tell you about, and it involves Family Research Council President Tony Perkins, who wrapped up the conference. Apparently, he's like the full top-ranking bigot, so he's the one who closes the whole thing out. And he started doing fear-mongering about how pastors are going to be dragged, kicking and screaming out of their churches if the Supreme Court strikes down bans on same-sex marriage in the decision that at this point should be just weeks away. Let's take a look at the video, listen to the audio. This is Tony Perkins.
We are about to be challenged to the very core of what it means to be a Christian. If the court hands down this decision, redefining marriage for America, they're not going to come and take you dragging and kicking and screaming out of your church in the next 6 months. You might have 5 years. But let me tell you who's going to face it first. It's your folks that are sitting in the pew. Dr. Lutzer, you wrote about this in one of your recent books. You're preparing your church for persecution. We need to challenge our people.
So let's see. The 25% of America that isn't Christian, Lewis, is apparently going to overwhelm all Christian pastors and drag them kicking and screaming out of their churches. These are some incredible non-Christians.
I think if the Supreme Court is deciding on something and you are trying to convince America of something, perhaps the best way to do that, if this is a constitutional argument that is being weighed in the Supreme Court, perhaps that's what you should be arguing, right? Maybe that gay marriage is unconstitutional.
Yes, and that seemed to have sort of faded, right? I mean, they were talking about that for a while, and then the arguments became, well, what about state constitution versus federal constitution? And then now those who see the direction this is going are advancing to just arguments of religious freedom. Tony Perkins is wrong because it's quite the opposite. As a secular society, we want to keep the pastors only in the churches, only talking religion, not politics, certainly not influencing politics or political candidates, etc. We want them to stay in the churches. Tony Perkins is saying the opposite of what would happen.
Yeah, I think so. But fear-mongering is the number one tool of the ultra-religious.
Well, yeah, it's amazing how they frame it, though, right? Pushing back against Christian bigotry is discriminating against those who are Christian.
Yeah, it's they're making themselves the victim. And it's, I don't think it's working.
Tony Perkins, essentially, to sum up his speech, go out there and be the best bigot that you can possibly be. Horrible story from my home country of Argentina. 2 judges in Argentina decided that a soccer coach who raped a 6-year-old boy should not be held entirely responsible because the child had already been traumatized by previous alleged abuse and because the child supposedly showed, quote, homosexual tendencies. The ruling actually has been sealed since it came down last year. It was recently leaked to the press. In this case, the judges decided that they were going to lower the soccer coach's sentence, Mario Talas's jail time, from 6 years all the way down to 38 months, saying that because the boy's father may have already raped him, he was used to such abuse, the boy was, and that he had showed homosexual traits. In radio and TV interviews defending the decision this week, Judge Piombo said the boy had, quote, signs of a transvestite conduct, of conduct we had to take into account, and went on to argue that he had already had, quote, the initiation by his father into the worst of worlds, leading him to deprivation. So here we have victim blaming, right? The child's presumed homosexuality or transvestite conduct or prior victimization somehow made the soccer coach do this to him. And we also have gay blaming. So with regard to saying the boy had already been raped by his father, the boy's father is currently serving jail time for rape, but reportedly of his niece, not of this boy. And the family denies that he ever raped this particular boy. All sorts of reasons why the family may deny it, even if it's true. Maybe it's not true, whatever. The point is, legally, it shouldn't make a difference. But then the story gets even more concerning, because not only are people outraged at the judges because of this case, but people started looking into these judges and their history, and what they uncovered is insane. These judges have a long record of reducing sentences for sexual and gender-based crimes, including, this is just insane, justifying a pastor's rape of 2 teenage girls because the girls belonged to a lower economic class and were therefore part of a community that supposedly accepts a lower age of sexual activity. Can you imagine, Lewis, persistent and systematic victim blaming and rape excusal?
One of the first thing that comes to mind is, are these judges being paid off?
Right.
Right. That's what comes to mind first.
In
If
Argentina,
not,
that's a very fair question.
yes. So I think that might be a play here, because who could have such a distorted and perverted view of things, right?
It's incredible. And I have to say, I am just shocked that we've been able to find officials in Argentina who rival the corruption and vile nature of President Cristina Kirchner. That was also hugely eye-opening from this story.
Yeah, I think if we look hard enough, we'll find people like this in every country in the world. So Argentina is no exception.
A driverless truck corridor is being proposed that would go from Canada through the United States and into Mexico. There's a group that met in North Dakota last week, and they are working on creating a driverless truck corridor that would run through the 3 countries. The plan is to have a separate autonomous vehicle corridor along Route 83, which already runs north-south through Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, and then continues into Canadian province, the Canadian province of Manitoba. Lewis, have you driven on 83 in Texas?
83. I am not sure. I guess it's possible on my way down here. I did, but I don't remember, to be honest.
There's a study into the feasibility of the project that's being planned, and one of the individuals in charge of the project is saying that the group wants to travel to communities along the corridor to try to build support for it. Quote, "One of the challenges we have here in North Dakota is that we have a lot of energy production going on right now, but not enough pipelines to carry the oil from North Dakota to its destination point. So this means that some commodities like grain need to fight for space on trains. Creating a separate corridor could relieve some of that pressure, according to officials involved with the project. We know that the technology already exists. It's experimental, but it's already well into beta testing. Unmanned vehicles are said to be more efficient. You don't have to worry about the driver having too many hours in a day or in a week and having to rest or sleep. The vehicles are presumably going to be safer, less likely to be involved in accidents if you have all autonomous vehicles on this corridor. There is no question that if and when something like this happens, and I think it's more an issue of when rather than if, many jobs will disappear.
Jobs will disappear, but jobs will be created in the tech world, right? How many? I can't say if it's balanced. It probably isn't balanced, but this is the future. You can't deny that we're headed in this direction, and it's going to happen.
I think what a lot of people are missing when they email us with their opposition, or in some cases just lack of belief that this is going to be a thing, is this. This movement could be considered job and wage reducing capitalism at its finest, right? The way in which capitalism exports the need for people, kills jobs, kills wages, etc. But that's only the pessimistic approach. If we look at this the right way, this is something that could free society from the constraints of capitalism in needing to eke out an existence with an hourly wage to just try to cover your health insurance and housing and food costs and raise a family. The problem is not enough people are thinking forward in that way yet.
Yeah, they're thinking that no one's going to have a job and everyone's going to be, destitute. And, in this utopian society that we are imagining, yes, the machines are doing the vast majority of the work. And we might be able to sit back and have some time to relax.
The real questions, if we were looking at this the right way, the real questions wouldn't be, let's figure out how to not lose some of these jobs. They would be the questions that come up. I believe the book is called Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I think that's the one that I'm referring to, although it could be a different one, where things are the issues of basic labor are resolved by machines. So humans no longer have to worry about that. And then the real questions become about society. What do humans do when they're not working that is fulfilling and that should be the primary way to invest one's time? And those are real scary questions. For many people, it's easier to just be busy with work and the minutia of everyday life, because saying, hey, you know what? If I didn't have to work, what would I really do for the next however many years I have left on this planet that would be rewarding and fruitful and enjoyable for me? And that admittedly can be a pretty scary question for people.
But I think we'd rather be asking that question than how are we going to make ends meet? How am I going to put food on the table tonight? Maybe not any easier to answer, but I'd rather be asking, the questions you brought up.
And this does overlap a little bit into the concept of a resource-based economy. Sometimes people email me and ask me if that's a concept I'm familiar with. I am. I've seen a lot of material about that. There are some elements of plans for a resource-based economy that need a little bit of tweaking, but conceptually, we have the resources to resolve poverty, to resolve hunger, to resolve lack of health care. We have those resources. We have to allocate them properly. I hope that the autonomous vehicle world wakes people up to that instead of just having us sink into this very, very small mentality of it's just going to kill jobs and that's going to be it. Great program for you today. Glad you're with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our audience through the David Pakman Show membership system. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to find out more. Today's new member of the day is Diana Chorette. Diana, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Diana gets the David Pakman Show bonus show hosted by producer Lewis, where I am the sidekick, as well as commercial-free feeds of both the audio and video versions of both the broadcast show and the bonus show. Plus, all members like Diana get invited to our town hall meetings, like the one we had last week, which we uploaded to YouTube yesterday. The town halls are a very good David Pakman Show member benefit, wouldn't you say, Lewis? I mean, people really seem to like that.
Yeah, I think it may be, apart from the bonus show, of course,
naturally,
the best one.
Yes. No question about that. And it's just hugely exciting. I mean, I don't know what else to say. davidpakman.com/membership, sign up. And then just a few days away now from launching the David Pakman Show Indiegogo campaign fundraiser, the 10-year anniversary of our program. We are moving to Boston, expanding our studio, looking to hire producer Lewis full-time as the David Pakman Show production manager, expanding programming with a new host and investigative journalism, all of that being crowdfunded next week. If you want to be an early donor for that campaign, please get in touch with us and we will put you on a very, very special list. 4 years ago this week, Lewis admits to having inadvertently, or so he claimed, brought a huge knife onto an airplane. Lewis, we actually both went to visit a friend in Arizona, and Lewis forgot that he had this multi-tool, one of the tools being a large knife, in one of the pockets of his carry-on bag, and Lewis just completely got away with it. Nobody mentioned anything, and at the time we were wondering, Lewis, if you got away with this completely unnoticed, what else is getting past security at airports?
And we have read stories of people who take it upon themselves to test airport security And there was one story of a young man who successfully brought multiple guns through airport security. And so, you have to wonder, is it really just an illusion?
Well, when we talk about the illusion of security vis-a-vis the TSA, we have to compare to what? We have to compare to what would happen if there were no security at all. And that's kind of a very quick comparison. I think we all agree that there should be security, although maybe some would disagree. But then we compare with other types of security. For example, what's employed at Israel's Tel Aviv Ben Gurion Airport, which you're familiar with, Lewis. It includes multiple layers of security, as well as a more psychological approach, one that focuses more on the behavior of individuals rather than whether they have 110 or 95 milliliters of contact lens solution.
Yes, it is a much different system, and maybe a costlier system. I'm not really sure, but certainly the employees need much more training. And so maybe we can't do that.
Is there a sort of parallel now that we have several years of NSA surveillance under our belt and many years of so-called enhanced TSA security with the porno scanners and the porno pat-downs and the whole thing, which I've talked about extensively? Now that we have a few years, we heard from NSA officials all sorts of terrorist plots have been foiled by NSA surveillance. It turned out that that wasn't even so much an exaggeration as just blatantly untrue. Could we make a sort of similar analysis to the TSA, bearing in mind that obviously it would make sense to keep secret some of the specific foiled plots that maybe the TSA foiled, but we should still be thinking about that, right? What has this enhanced TSA security achieved for us?
Yeah, well, wouldn't the TSA want to announce that they found a bomb on someone? I mean, it would act. I think that would deter other would-be terrorists.
I can see both sides. On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, if that could provide information to would-be terrorists about what not to do if you want to avoid getting caught, right?
That's true, but I think it's clear that we don't really have any evidence that mass surveillance or airport security has foiled any huge terrorist plots.
Bath salts 3 years ago this week. It's incredible that it has been 3 years since that naked 31-year-old Miami man, Rudy Eugene, was caught eating someone else's face. He was shot and killed by police. Eugene accused Ronald Papo, a 65-year-old homeless man, of stealing his Bible. Eugene then beat him unconscious, pulled his pants off, and bit off most of the man's face. This was like a hugely disturbing story when it took place 3 years ago, Lewis.
It was. We'd never seen anything like it. And of course, the toxicology report came back only finding marijuana in his system. Okay, so conservatives loved that one. But it did not find anything. It was believed that he was on bath salts.
And did we get an explanation at the time for why he could have been on bath salts, yet the toxicology report did not find that? Was there ever any discussion about that?
Yes, I believe that is the case. I think it's just one of those things that's harder to detect, or perhaps they weren't doing the right tests, looking for something of that nature.
This was not, by any means, the last incident of cannibalism and bath salts. This seemed to be sort of the start of a chain of revelations about these new designer drugs. And we've talked about, is it pronounced crocodile or crocodile?
I think it's crocodile.
Crocodile and Flacca now are making waves. A lot of these seem to be popping up in Florida. We've talked about some of these on the bonus show. Lewis, when you were going to school in Florida, you went to school in Winter Park, Florida, kind of a suburb of Orlando. Were you aware of less common drugs floating around?
No. It was pretty much all pot and some cocaine in my circles anyway, but it seems like the really harsh stuff is in southern Florida.
Yes, it does seem like that is a place that seems to be really designing a lot of drugs. They're certainly at least testing new designs, if to use a sort of analogy. So recently we haven't seen as much about bath salts, but it's the new designer drugs. Do you think we're just now in a phase with regard to drugs where it's just a kind of new, the technology that the average mid-level drug dealer or drug producer has access to allows for the creation of many more drugs. So we're kind of in a sampling phase.
I think so. People are looking to make things more addictive than anything else that's out there, and they're looking to make it more cheaply. So it's some really nasty stuff coming out of these, wherever it's coming from.
And as usual, don't we run into the same issues of when these are considered illicit drugs, illegal drugs, you don't really know what you're getting. So you actually may have a much higher victimization rate and social cost as a result of not legalizing and regulating recreational drugs, because people could be taking stuff that has anything in it.
Oh yeah, even when you buy pot and you don't know where it's coming from, it could be laced with who knows what. Same applies to cocaine, and so yes, I think at the very least, of course, we should have legalized recreational pot, and let's grow it here.
1 year ago this week, the Isla Vista, California mass shooting carried out by 22-year-old Elliot Rodger. Between the stabbing and the shooting, he killed 6 people and injured 14 others during his rampage. There was an insane media frenzy a year ago. It brought the right-wingers out of the woodwork. A Fox News expert suggested that maybe gay impulses triggered Elliot Rodger's rampage. The father of a shooting victim made some comments about the NRA, which then Fox News edited out. Joe the Plumber, who of course is actually Samuel Wurzelbacher, not the licensed plumber, said that dead kids don't trump our rights as a sort of manifesto that it doesn't matter who dies. We should not think about limiting access to guns or any kind of gun control, gun safety measures of any kind. A year later, in the last few months, we've actually interviewed some right-wingers, Lewis, who have pointed to the Elliot Rodger case as sort of an example of both liberal violence and reasons why we should not control guns. It's so funny how once you get any amount of distance from the incident, the right figures out all new ways to use it.
Yes, this was a great one for them because it wasn't your typical lone wolf, right-wing, libertarian type terrorist. So lots of interesting commentary. Not too many people talking about it now, though.
No, it seems to come up more in a laundry list. So, like, I'm trying to think who it was. Now I don't remember who we recently interviewed who said, yeah, but David, you need to rethink your position on, I don't even remember what it was. I think guns, because of A, B, C, and Elliot Rodger, as if Elliot Rodger completely upended our understanding of American violence and gun safety and so on and so forth. I think that when we look at channels like Fox News and hear from people like Joe the Plumber, though, when they come out after such an acutely traumatic incident such as this for so many people, and they expose themselves as just pushing a particular agenda, they do lose credibility with more and more people, don't they? Or maybe I'm just looking at it optimistically and they don't, because they're just throwing red meat to the people who love it.
Yeah, they are throwing red meat out there. They gain a lot of credibility with those people who, I don't know, I guess are just passionate about that one topic.
Yeah. All right, that is This Week in Show History. Updating stories, any stories you would like us to update, email us through our website, davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, or send us tweets on Twitter, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
As the election starts to get going, one of the most important things that we've talked about a million times is funding and money and political campaign financing, etc. And I want to go back to an interview we did back in May of 2011 with Taki Oldham, who's the director of a documentary called The Billionaire's Tea Party. It talks to us about astroturf. The documentary talks about the Tea Party and how these so-called grassroots groups have been completely infiltrated by corporations. We know that the PACs are going to be out in full force. The Koch brothers are going to be out in full force for 2016. So let's go back to this great interview. It'll set the context for a lot of what we will be discussing in the lead up to the 2016 election as well. We're speaking with Taki Oldham, director of documentary film Billionaire's Tea Party, also AstroTurf Wars, how corporate America is faking a grassroots revolution. I met Taki very briefly at the Free Press Conference in Boston a couple of weeks ago. I'm fascinated to hear more about this, Taki. Tell me about, first of all, the Tea Party is not really the grassroots movement they would want us to believe, is it?
Well, it's not as simple as saying it's one thing or another. I mean, it has a large grassroots element. No one can deny that, and you can't tell a Tea Party person, or you're being paid for or sponsored by billionaires. But what it is a large amount of propaganda that has gone into a number of what they call front groups or astroturf groups, or basically corporate-funded fake grassroots groups that then have infused their brand of propaganda and sort of populism into the Tea Parties from day one, so that many people have jumped on the bandwagon, but the people who are writing the messages are basically corporate sponsored, or they're ideologically sponsored by people like brothers David and Charles Koch, who basically are on a mission to get rid of government.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, a lot of the front groups involved in the Tea Party strike me as similar to the front groups Wendell Potter talks about in his book Deadly Spin when it comes to preventing single-payer health care from taking grasp, or the groups that were out there, groups with the term clean air that actually wanted to protect the, quote, rights of smokers. It rings very similar to me in terms of the way that the money is funneled around and appeared to come from the people.
Absolutely. I mean, the roots of this term astroturf are very much around these groups that don't even have members at all most of the time. I mean, we're talking about groups, as you said, the whole point of them is to sound like they're genuine people behind them. But in fact, they're corporate sponsored. They're basically made by public relations companies on behalf of a tobacco company or a health insurer who basically wants it to look like their point of view is being spoken by the man in the streets, as opposed to a large corporation who has a specific financial interest in this. Now, the difference with the groups that have gotten into the Tea Parties from day one, I need to make it very clear, because people say, oh, they joined in later on, but it was from day one. They're groups with names like Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Groups. And the difference between these groups and those that you mentioned are that the other groups have no members at all. They really are just like an advertising campaign. Whereas these type, the difference is that they use propaganda with words like big government and individual rights, and they paint this idea that the government is out to get the man in the street, the individual, with this kind of evil agenda, when in fact what's happening, and it gets a lot of popular support.
Yeah.
And groups like this have got hundreds of thousands of members.
How did you infiltrate the Tea Party movement, especially given that I would assume they would be suspicious if anybody with an Australian accent showing up?
Quite the opposite. I think that if I was wandering around with an American accent, they would have been suspicious of what I was doing. I was too much of an anomaly for an Australian to be wandering around this thing in the first place, that people would come up to you and say, what are you doing here? Because there was suspicion, I think, even from early times. I think various conservative talk show hosts and such, and the operatives who are running the groups behind this, the ones I mentioned before, are sort of telling people to be wary of the Liberals with their cameras. But as soon as they hear an Australian accent, the defence mechanisms melted away. So that actually helped me a lot. Basically, I infiltrated by just wandering around with a camera and kind of saying that I was interested in what was going on, and I to the people I interviewed around the place, I just say, look, I'm making a film, and I'd say, I think what you're doing is pretty incredible, and this is kind of an opposite version of what Obama did when he got in with this kind of grassroots uprising in the media. And I didn't necessarily say what my opinion on the book was either way. I just kind of say I thought it was amazing.
Real quick, in the last few seconds we have, could a Tea Party, something similar to the Tea Party, develop in Australia, given how different the political system is? I mean, is this the type of thing that really is ripe here in America, but it just could not or would not happen in Australia, for example?
It couldn't. It's a very long answer, but the quick version is because basically the Americans the idea of patriotism and the flag and the founding fathers and these things that are able to be manipulated by propagandists who wrap these ideas in the flag. In Australians or English, we're just kind of like, yeah, whatever, we don't have that incredible sense of patriotism that is great, but is also can be manipulated.
All right, Taki Oldham, director of the documentary film Billionaire's Tea Party. I highly recommend it. Thanks for joining us where exactly are you?
I'm in a small town called Mocha, which is in the Dominican Republic. I'm sort of taking a bit of a breather at the moment. So if you've heard dogs barking or motorcycles going by, that's just life here, I'm afraid.
All right, well, it looks like it's very hot there, so I'll let you get back to it. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is that time of the week, time to answer audience questions, and we have some really great ones this week. Send them in via email, voicemail, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, what else? Snail mail, I guess. You could send us a letter with your audience question, but it's probably not the fastest way or the most logical. First question is from Alexandra. Should movies be rated R just for lots of swearing? I have a number of problems, any number I would say, with the film rating system in the United States. Let's review what the ratings are. You've got G, right, which is general audiences, all ages admitted, nothing that would be offensive to parents for viewing by children. PG is parental guidance suggested. Some material may not be suitable for children. Parents are urged to give parental guidance. There may be some content that parents wouldn't want for young children. Then there's PG-13, Lewis. PG-13, sort of the rated R of little kids, if I recall correctly. PG-13, parents should be strongly cautioned. Some material may be inappropriate for children under 13. Parents are urged to be cautious. Some material may be inappropriate for preteens as well. And then you have R, restricted. Under 17, must be accompanied by a parent or an adult guardian. There's some adult material. Parents are urged to learn more about the film before taking young children. And then NC-17, adults only, no one under 17 admitted. Clearly, children just can't go there. So, there's a lot of discussion around where is the line between PG-13 and R, and then between R and NC-17. I personally don't think movies should be rated R just because there is swearing, right? Pervasive or regular swearing in the movies. But that's because my sensibilities are quite different, where in other countries, like in Argentina, where I was born, swearing on TV is just not really a huge deal. Even nudity on TV is not a big deal. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily full frontal penis nudity, right? But certainly a bare breast here and there, or a man who is naked and you see him from the back or something like that. These things were just never a big deal. I don't think they ruin children's lives, etc. So my opinion is no. Based on swearing alone, a movie should not be rated R.
Yeah, I would share your opinion on that. But now I believe you can swear, you can say the F word in an R-rated movie, depending on its context, and I believe only once in a PG-13 movie.
Right.
You can say it once, I believe, depending on the context. If you are using it in reference to intercourse, I think it is not allowed. However, a middle finger and the F word, I think, is allowed once in PG-13 movies. So these ratings change over time.
Yes, they do. And I think that we know that the ratings have become much more sort of liberal in the general sense over time, where there was at one point, much of what today is PG-13 would have been rated R. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure. That has changed, and maybe it will continue in that direction, and maybe we will see PG-13 movies full of swears.
What do you think actually should be the requirements met for a movie to be rated R. So swearing alone, you said, aside from what it is, you don't actually think that that's a good reason to have a movie be rated R. What does a true rated R movie look like in your mind?
I guess, that's tough. I guess it would depend on the level of graphic violence and sex. I mean, I'm not really sure. I think, like you said, my sensibilities are different from other people's.
And this is also complicated because you're essentially saying, I know it when I see it. I know rated R when I see it. And that by its very nature is a very subjective way to determine what's R or PG-13. And it's related to sort of the cultural context around us, which is part of why PG-13 movies today certainly would have been rated R 25 years ago. Some PG-13 movies.
Yeah, we're so used to seeing, we're so used to what rated R is that I think we just have this idea in our heads of if we saw a movie, we'd know what it was. But that'll change. I think it will change.
If you accidentally had a kid, love the kid, congrats, it's all hunky-dory. At what age would you, based on today's rated R standards, at what age would you be comfortable? Obviously, kids can sneak in. I get that. But let's just assume everything's on the up and up with you. At what age would you be comfortable saying to your kid, you can go to the rated R movies. If you can get in, I don't care that you see a rated R movie without me. Would it be 13, 15, 16?
13 would be fine.
Really?
Yeah. I don't, considering this day and age, how exposed that kid is going to be to similar things on TV and in video games. I think that, I think my kid probably will have been exposed to all of that stuff much younger than 13.
So there's no rated R movie right now that you would not want a 13-year-old seeing on their own.
I guess not. Yeah, I think I'll stick with that. Yeah.
All right. I don't really have an answer to that, but to answer the original question from Alexandra, no, movies should not be rated R just for swears. Next question is from Iolet. You've talked about the importance of sex before marriage, but what about cohabitation? Should couples live together before marriage? I say absolutely, Lewis, and we have talked about sex before marriage, and we've talked about how really impractical it is. If you have a realistic understanding that sex is an important component of relationships, then it seems at its face absurd to say we are not going to explore that element of the relationship until after we've made the commitment of marriage. So we were united on that, Lewis. Cohabitation, though, what is your view?
My view is that this will be just as important, if not maybe even more important, because you're not really going to know what life is like with someone if you don't live with them, if you don't have to deal with them on a regular basis, on a daily basis, waking up, going to bed, and everything in between. No
question about it. And I think that not cohabitating, of course, if it's not practical because it's a long distance relationship or something, then that's a different thing. But what I'm saying is deciding that we will not share space and live together in that way until we're married, it just doesn't seem smart. Now, of course, there will be many relationships that there is no cohabitation and or no sex before marriage that are perfectly fine relationships. But from an odds basis, I think you're improving your odds. If the relationship is still good with cohabitation before marriage, that certainly bodes well, I think, for the marriage longer term.
Agreed. I think you are improving your odds of having a long, healthy marriage.
If you're the son or daughter, though, of a parent who, for religious or other reasons, says that's not appropriate, right? But you've looked around, you've talked to people, and just your pragmatic common sense tells you, if I get married to someone before I even know what it'll be like to live with them or what our sexual relationship will be like, that doesn't seem like it's going to set me up for a good relationship. How do you decide what to do? Do you hide the reality from your parents that you may be cohabitating or having sex with this person? Or do you just tell them that that's what's going on and risk alienating them and maybe they wouldn't be part of your eventual marriage? How is one to navigate that, Lewis?
That is a tough question because I don't have that type of relationship with my parents. If I think they're wrong, I tell them they're wrong. they'd also never, that situation would never happen with my parents. So, you know, I don't really know how to answer that. I would say that you would have to just tell your parents that, well, I'm going to try this, and you know, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to do it anyway.
All right, Lewis taking the polite but pragmatic approach in his hypothetical. Yeah, I think it's a really tough situation, and obviously it would be better for everybody if parents did not do that because of the horrible situations that it can create. Last question today is from Sam. Sam wants to know, how often do either of you interact with people of other races or ethnicities to your own? Well, I live in New York City, so essentially every day. I don't know. I mean, I understand. I wish I knew where this person was from, because the way the question is presented, it sort of implies that there is a chance that maybe I wouldn't interact with people of other races or ethnicities regularly. And maybe I mean, that is true in certain parts of the country, no question about it. But yeah, every day. I mean, it's such a part of the fabric of daily life here in New York City that it's completely sort of blended into the background for me. Although I must say, growing up in very white Western Massachusetts, Lewis, when I first moved to New York City, it was very noticeable to me that there's just so much diversity here. And then that took a little bit of sort of adjusting to realize that it's the norm. And then now when I go back to Western Massachusetts, it's very noticeable to me that it's all white people, that there's just nothing but white people essentially everywhere that you go.
Yes, I live in Austin, and so I am, you know, maybe not daily in my case, but I work on 6th Street in Austin, and it is it's a melting pot, and so, you know, I can say weekly at the very least I am interacting with people from all over the world.
Yes, although
right.
we must admit, Lewis, that statistically, Austin is in some ways diverse and in some ways not quite so diverse. I mean, certainly as Texas as a whole has a pretty large Hispanic population, the Hispanic population of Austin basically matches that of Texas, around 35%. But there are very few African Americans in Austin, fewer even than in Texas at large. But then as far as the Asian population in Austin, about twice that of the average in Texas. So yeah, I mean, it is interesting how a place can both feel diverse and not be, and at the same time not feel diverse, but be diverse on paper because of the sort of segregated nature of the diversity.
Right. Now, a friend of ours spent some time in India, and you know, not in one of the tourist hotspots of India either. And he said that he was walking down the street and people were taking pictures of him just because they were amazed to see this, you know, this white guy with this big beard walking down the street. And
yeah,
so,
and my girlfriend, when she went to Thailand, she went to some of the less touristy parts of Thailand. And there also, it was people wanted to take her picture and her friend's picture because they were just amazed at someone who had this different look. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are those places where you will not see or interact with a person of another race or ethnicity, perhaps your entire life. But I can't imagine being in one of those places.
A really funny one that I've experienced, because it's similar but different to this, is when people say, "Oh, you're Jewish? I've never met a Jewish person." To which I obviously react, listen, if you grew up in Massachusetts, I get that Boston has the sort of higher concentration of Jews, but Massachusetts, compared to most of the country, has a higher Jewish population. Are you open to the idea that you met someone who was Jewish, but because they don't have horns, for example, or for whatever other reason they don't stand out physically, you just didn't know that they were Jewish? And if you didn't discuss religion, you wouldn't know that. It's so funny when people say that to me in Massachusetts. I've never met another Jewish person, and I'm 25, and I've lived here my entire life.
Yeah, it's that's never happened to me. And if I ever had that discussion with someone, I've forgotten about it. But that is kind of silly.
Yeah, it's pretty awkward, I must say.
I would imagine so, but I'm sure you handle it very well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that will be a story maybe for the bonus show, how I handle it. Let's wrap up on that note before things get too crazy on the show. We've got a great bonus show coming up. The Indiegogo campaign will start next week for the big expansion. Huge things happening. Hopefully you've heard me mention it at least once or twice by now, and we will have much more information about that on the bonus show as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.